If it's your first movie, people shouldn't be expecting your first movie to be a hit. That's a really high. It happens, but that's mismanaged expectations. It's to show some promised talent that you can build on. So get it out there, whatever it takes.
Hi, Alexis. Thank you for being here. It's so great having you on Manor House podcast. Your career, spanning over 20 years, is nothing short of remarkable. Starting as an entertainment attorney to then spending nearly 2 decades at Endeavor, which later became William Morris Endeavor, WME, and now as the founder of Cat 5, an independent action film financing and production label. Your track record truly speaks for itself, and we're especially excited to talk about Working Man, Cat 5's first project, a feature film written by Sylvester Stallone, starring Jason Statham. And it's currently available in theaters and some of the major streaming platforms. There's just so much to cover about your career, and we're gonna dive right into it. First and foremost, you were born and raised here in Miami, Florida. How has the city shaped your personal and professional perspective?
Oh my God, yes. I was born and raised mainly in Kendall to Cuban immigrant parents who came from Cuba when they were young, like in their, my dad was probably 10, my mom 12, a couple years later, something around that. How has it shaped my career or my identity? Or I'd say Miami's always been very much a part of my identity, to the point where depending where I was, like I went to undergrad in Vanderbilt, and like I would probably, at a time when very few Miami kids were at Vanderbilt in Nashville in the South, and certainly like being from Miami was infused with my identity, for better for worse, like to get made fun of as well.
Oh, wow.
In a playful way, but sure, like it was like I would stand out as being very Miami in a place like that. In LA, which has many similarities, I'd say with Miami, that's less, that would have been less common. But my connection to Miami never dissipated, as in I would always be excited to meet other people that were in LA or in my industry that were from Miami, or other people that were Cuban, which often meant they were from Miami. And so that was always part of my identity, for sure.
And was there a specific key moment that inspired you to be in the film industry, maybe a specific movie or TV show?
I was into the arts and entertainment from a very young age. I acted in kind of shows starting in elementary school. I acted and directed in high school. Ended up doing that in college as well. Never with the intention that that would be a profession, but always with an interest in the space and in being somehow connected to the industry. I used to read Entertainment Weekly as a very young kid. I used to read film reviews to movies that I couldn't possibly have understood. Mm-hmm. Also very young, I would read Miami Herald reviews of movies that I was way too young to watch. So yeah, I was always just interested in the information around Hollywood and around movie making. At that time, there wasn't a lot of access to like what the kinds of jobs were in Hollywood that you could do. I think most people probably just moved to LA to find a job in the entertainment industry. So that interest kind of led me to come up with the idea that the most responsible way, especially for the child of immigrants, the most responsible way to get into this crazy industry would be as a lawyer, right? I would go to law school in order to be an entertainment lawyer. So that path, even going to law school, and especially going to law school in LA, was very intentionally in order to become part of the entertainment industry in this role that I thought was sufficiently risky. Like being in that industry that was close enough at the time. I thought like I'll be an entertainment lawyer and that'll be satisfying.
So this was all planned. That's great.
That part was planned. The dissatisfaction with that not being enough wasn't planned, mm-hmm. which I think was okay, because having that experience, having the deal-making experience and the ability to work with lawyers and manage lawyers and cut through a lot of the inefficiencies is invaluable. And, had I known that that wasn't the ultimate path, you probably wouldn't have gone to law school, and you wouldn't have started that path. You would have said, okay, I want to be an agent, let me just go work in the mailroom, which was a very traditional way into agencies. But the most direct way into agencies would have been you start in the mailroom, you work your way up. Even if you went to law school or business school, or even if you had another job, there were investment bankers that decided they were unhappy in finance and they would go join the mailroom, at a big agency and kind of work their way back up.
There's no set way in the film industry. I feel like everybody comes from different background, and it's like the beauty of it. But how do you see Miami's current film industry compared to other cities like Los Angeles and New York? And what's your perspective on Florida's potential as a film hub in terms of opportunities, resources, and talent?
That's an entire podcast we can do on that.
Right?
I think it's maturing in the same way that a lot of other industries are maturing in Miami due to the wave of people moving here from other places and bringing professionalism in other sectors that I don't think that's the issue in the entertainment sector. I don't think it's a lack of anytime there's a small amount of something, right? Anytime there's an industry that is in a city that doesn't kind of give it enough resources to attract more people to it, then there's going to be limited crews, for example. There's going to be limited people here who have operated in the industry at a high level. Like that's all going to be limited. I don't think that's a lack of professionalism. It's a lack of kind of volume. There's not enough people here that are in the industry that would force it to mature. I think in other industries you've seen that happen. You're seeing it happen in the finance world now, where like the wave of people that have come in from Chicago or New York or California are forcing kind of the industry to evolve and mature because they come from a sector or a place where it's much more serious. For that to happen in the entertainment industry here, and really the way it happens in any other, or I'd say most other cities or states around the country, is driven by production incentives, which then attract more productions, which attracts then more crews to want to be here because there's more work and more steady work. And until that happens, the local industry, right, which is ultimately always judged and you judge it by how many jobs are available, right? So productions create a lot of jobs. There's a lot of roles on a production. Till there's more jobs here that allow people to move here because they know there's work, or keep people that live here they stay in Miami because they know they can get into the industry here. The incentives are kind of what's necessary in order for that to happen. I will say there are way more people here in the industry than than even I know. Because we don't have the culture and the volume, we don't run into each other. We have to find each other. We have to hear about each other. We have to make connections somewhat organically, not by running into each other at events. And that's what LA provides. That's what New York provides. Some of the other cities that have a lot of creatives, or a lot of a creative. Austin is a place with a lot of creatives, right? Not just in film and TV, but in comedy, for example. Nashville is a place with a lot of creatives, not just country musicians, but songwriters, other kinds of musicians, actors and filmmakers. Like the places that have the culture that's attracted a lot of artists will then have the events and the collisions that facilitate the growth of that industry, right? So I think that is happening, that part. To get to that next level where there's a volume of jobs, you need production incentives of significance.
Which was my last question, and you sort of already answered to it, but definitely looking at the history, Florida and Miami-Dade had ups and downs with its film incentives, and now we know there's like a new program coming out. How do you feel about its current state? And do you think it's competitive enough compared to other states to attract enough productions here?
Well, so for starters, there's no state incentive. So to even make the comparison of other states is already a little bit like missing the bigger issue. I think that what is happening at the county level, or even in some instances like city levels, to provide some incentives to attract production is amazing. It's the only place I know of in the world where you have essentially regional incentives without an overarching state or country incentive. Most places where there are regional incentives, it's like a little kicker to say, hey, there's a Florida incentive, we want you to shoot in Broward over Dade, pick Broward over Dade, and you get a little bit more, right? We'll give you a little bit more resources. That's how we try it. In Savannah, they do that right in Georgia because the hub is Atlanta. Well, can we give you a little bit more to come to Savannah or to come to Columbus, Georgia, right? Built a studio, right? They got to give a little bit more to compete. Here, it's the only thing, right? So it can't compete with state incentives that are, especially the ones that are the best in the country, but it's a start, and it's a start that is an improvement from what they were doing before, which is just waiting essentially for the right makeup in the state administration that would facilitate the conversation to get incentives back in place. From the conversations I've had, it feels like there's momentum there, but it's not quite the right time that's going to happen. There's always lobbying going on for incentives at the state level. There's a lot of fundamental obstacles to having incentives, the lack of a state, income tax being one of those issues. Like, where is this going to get paid? How will this get funded? Like, where is it going to come from in the budget, right? Because in a lot of states, it's a state tax credit is one of the most common ones. And like, that's not going to be an option here. It's going to have to be funded another way. I will say that's the state level. What we're dealing with in this exact moment in America is a runaway production issue abroad. So we're not just competing with other states here, we're competing with, shows that go and shoot in Europe or shoot in South America or shoot in Australia. And that's across the industry, right? That's an industry issue, but it'll obviously be felt at the state level and then consequently at the city level as well. And that's something that's a whole other conversation as well.
Yes.
Until there's something done to address that, the trickle to the state and the cities will suffer.
Sounds like we'll have to do another podcast episode just to talk about incentives. Yeah. But let's go back to your early beginnings. And You started your career as an entertainment attorney. And how do you think this foundation influenced your approach to producing and financing and deal structuring?
For starters, at the very base level, because people ask me all the time, does your law experience, is it still relevant to what you do now that you're closer into the creative space? And the answer is like almost every day, because I have to deal with lawyers. And lawyers, they're not the only ones, but lawyers in the entertainment industry are notorious for being roadblocks. They can slow down deals and momentum, and most of that's just because they're handling so much business, and there tends to be a priority on the things that are on fire. Like today we deal with the most urgent things, whether that's urgent from a deadline standpoint or that's urgent from a how important is my client standpoint. But the point is, when you wake up as a lawyer, those are going to be the two things you prioritize, and everything else you'll keep just kind of shuffling down, right? And you can feel that if you have something that doesn't register, like if you're not that big a client, that's not that urgent a matter, it can feel very slow, notoriously slow. So my law experience allows me to know how to manage lawyers. It allows me how to do a lot of things myself if I needed to. It's not the best use of my time or the most satisfying use of my time, but if I hit a roadblock, I can get through it myself. I'm not dependent on the lawyer to advance things. So managing lawyers essentially is...
It's also very expensive for
It is very expensive, but my time is very expensive. So it's like if I can do a lot of lawyering myself, right? I've done it a long time. That would be a very bad use of my time in a relationship with somebody, right? It's like, I'm going to partner with you. I'm going to be your producing partner. I'm going to do the legal work. Not an amazing pitch and not very satisfying for me, but I'll help you manage lawyers in order to keep those costs as efficient as possible. And more importantly, to make sure things move at a pace that allows us to take advantage of momentum, which is what a lot of Hollywood is about, building that momentum, maintaining that momentum, capitalizing on that momentum. That's where it's invaluable. Pulling back from that to just kind of general deal making, when you talk about the financing, that's an experience. The structuring of financing is an experience I had both as a lawyer and as an agent. So we'll put all that under the heading of I know how to do a lot of different things that are relevant to the producing, the general concept of producing or putting movies together, right, of getting movies made, when you kind of call all of that producing. It's like very few people, relatively speaking, are adept at talking about all of those things, right? And for me, I definitely can talk creative, but if we're going to start talking about script notes and reading multiple drafts of scripts, right, and kind of finding nuance and kind of working very intimately with writers on kind of cracking the development process, I understand that at a very high level. It's not it's also not the best use of my. There are people who are very good at that. A lot of people in the entertainment industry, there's a lot of splinter skills, and people that are incredibly good at doing that, or at watching multiple cuts of a movie and being able to make incremental improvements, both to be able to have the expertise to recognize what could be improved, and then the skill to convince a filmmaker of making a change or how to make that change. That's an incredible skill, and also I'd say a splinter skill. And I would say most people that can do that probably can't even look at a contract, right? There's a lot of that. So I think I can do a lot of those things, right? Like I wouldn't be the best lawyer on a deal because I don't do that every day. And I wouldn't be the best person to be giving notes on a script, but I can kind of talk about all of it, and I can oversee people or partner with people who are doing all those little jobs.
And for filmmakers with no legal background, do you have any specific resources or practices that they can apply to their business to navigate better?
I've been saying this since I was a lawyer, which is like there's an incredible amount of resources online now. Like that excuse of like there's so many books, there's so many websites, there's so many lawyers who provide papers and free resources to give people the ability to do at least a little bit of it themselves. That just takes doing the homework and having, comprehension of what you're reading. Like I said, some artists can't do, like their brains don't function in a way where they can do that. But you can partner with somebody who can, that doesn't need to be a lawyer. So you find somebody that's a little bit more left brain than you and have them read resources that are available online or read books about, entertainment law or entertainment deal making. There's everything's kind of like now available.
Yeah, and those books, some of them also have templates. Do you believe
Absolutely.
in using those templates or having your entertainment attorney from the very beginning and do not make any moves without having an attorney on board?
That depends. Yeah, there's too many factors at play there. Like if you have the resources to be able to have an attorney, at least, if you have the resources to be able to have an attorney who can handle at least a deal for you, so you're getting a template from somebody who is engaged to do it for you, I say that's better than finding something online and thinking that's going to be sufficient. But it depends what we're talking about, right?
Yeah,
like, when you talk about like an option purchase agreement and you're trying to acquire some rights, get book rights, right? Like, option a screenplay. Like, yeah, those are pretty standardized deals. And until you get into sophisticated ones, because it's a big author or a writer with a big track record and a lot of leverage, like they're fairly simple deals.
Mm-hmm. And early in your career, you also were very active at high-end film festivals like Sundance. And so how can filmmakers best prepare before attending these sort of film festivals, and how can they make the best of their time while there?
Are they there with a film, or are they there to like network?
They're there with a film, and also, while they're there, I guess they can also network.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, depending on the festival, if you have a film in the festival, most festivals are pretty good at providing an experience for the filmmaker, especially the high-end festivals, which are the ones you asked about. Like, Sundance filmmakers are going to have a full schedule between what they're doing for their film, seeing other films, interacting with other filmmakers, gatherings, parties that are for the filmmakers and not for anybody else. When you get into more regional festivals that maybe don't have those resources, it might not all be turnkey, but it's talking to as many people as possible, both in that community and other filmmakers that are there, and interacting with as many people as possible, which is always more fun in real life at a festival. But again, we're living at a time where like you can find those people from home around the world and be able to have Zooms and interactions with other filmmakers or producers or representatives in a way that didn't exist when I was coming up.
Mm-hmm. And do you, for example, recommend going to these festivals with a distributor already locked in, or it's better to see what's available? And
you don't always have an option of one or the other, so like it's hard to give a monolithic answer to that. Yeah,
there's so many scenarios and possibilities.
If you can sell a movie to a distributor without having taken it, I mean, in my history, we take movies to festivals to have a platform to show them to the distributors to create auctions. So when you can get a movie into Sundance and it can play well at Sundance and all the distributors are there, having budgeted to spend a certain amount of money at Sundance to find a movie for the end of the year, right? You have really captive buyers who have FOMO, like they don't want to miss out on a movie. So it's not good business for anybody to buy a movie overnight, right? You saw a movie at 8 o'clock at night and it's an overnight auction, and I'm telling you, you can go to sleep, but you might wake up and I've sold the movie. That creates an intense negotiating process that can lead to movies being bought with emotion more than rationale.
The bidding war.
And there's a history. And when that happens, it's very, very fun. And like you're like, I want that all the time. And then 99% of the movies don't get that. And even if they're at a festival, maybe they're not getting that attention, and you're taking 3 months to make a deal if that, right? Or you're not in a festival, you don't have that platform, and you're screening it with links. Like there's a lot of different ways that can go down. Depends on what you have, right? Depends on the goods.
And then what's your advice for filmmakers transitioning from film festival circuit to distribution phase, especially when a film doesn't immediately get picked up?
Keep turning rocks over, like and ultimately there are ways to get your film seen, right? That don't depend on the gatekeepers of distributors to get it out there. Especially today. Does it mean it'll generate revenue? Maybe, maybe not, right? Like there's AVOD platforms now that if you can get something on Tubi, which even that still takes, having some kind of interest from them to load it onto the platform. Like, yes, but they don't pay for it. It's rev share, like it's on there, and then it just depends on how often it gets seen, right? There's always these kind of things. There's putting your movie on YouTube, putting your movie on Vimeo, and just marketing it. Maybe you're not generating revenue, but you're getting the movie seen. So look, that's not a sale. That's not going to be lucrative. You might have financiers who don't get their money back, but at some point in time, if you've turned over every rock, then it's just about how do I share the work that I made so that I can progress in my career, whatever. If it's your first movie, people shouldn't be expecting your first movie to be a hit. That's a really high, it happens, but that's mismanaged expectations. It's to show some promised talent that you can build on. So get it out there, whatever it takes.
Yeah, definitely, and it's an invaluable advice, I think, for first-time filmmakers who might be listening right now. So,
yeah.
Thank you. And you joined Endeavor in 2007, just before its merger with William Morris to become WME in 2009. And you quickly became a partner and helped sell and package hundreds of films. And so, what were the biggest takeaways from that experience, especially for filmmakers who may be trying to get in the industry right now?
So much of that business was about packaging, right? Attracting talent. Good material attracts good filmmakers and actors, right? And great filmmakers attract even better actors. And when you have the package of, like, when you have those elements, financing is relatively easy, as long as you have something that feels like it's commercial. Relatively commercial, right? And you can have an amazing package and have something that's not commercial, and you'll still be able to attract financing because you have actors who are people will want to watch those actors whatever they're doing, right? So like that's why that business exists at a talent agency, is to be able to kind of package a project with the elements that will attract financing, that will then get the movie made, that will attract distribution. And sometimes those things happen all at the same time early, and sometimes it takes making a movie independently and then selling it. But still, the actors that are in there are not just what can make your movie better than other actors, but also what can give you marketing assets for a distributor to release the movie, right? They can get those actors on talk shows, right? Doesn't apply to every actor, right? So the A-list talent, right, is what really drives a lot of the business.
Mm-hmm. And you later helped launch Endeavor Content and led the film group through a major revolution from just sales agency to then full service content studio and content ownership. What was that shift like behind the scenes for you?
Well, behind the scenes, it was Ari Emanuel, who was our leader at WME, which then Endeavor became the parent company of all the assets in the portfolio, WME, IMG, UFC, right? It was all part of the same kind of company. What he was, before we spun out as Endeavor Content, all those roles that you described were all service roles, right? Like we would raise money for a project from third parties, for somebody else's project, often on behalf of a client of the agency. We'd find ways to transact, but we were creating value for other people. We were creating value for that client. We were creating value for that financier, for those producers. And, basically Ari at some point was like, you guys see everything, understand the trends, kind of know what is interesting. Let's start having, let's start making our own bets and having ownership, creating kind of more than service economics. Service economics have a ceiling, right? You're taking a percentage of something, but you don't control the project, you don't control the IP, you don't build a library. And he was just ready to flip that switch and say we should be doing that as well.
And that journey also included a high-profile dispute with Writers Guild. And how did that experience shape your views on ownership, representation, and creative control?
Well, the only way it shaped it was, when Ari made that choice, it was in defiance of a very old talent agency act that, under very different conditions, had made this rule that a company that was in the representation business couldn't produce or could own a very small percentage of production. I think when we started, he was confident that we would win that dispute, right? We did not win that dispute. It didn't change the strategy. What it changed is that then Endeavor could no longer own, it was a forced divestment. Endeavor could no longer own more than 20% of Endeavor content. By the time that happened, we had already built our company into an incredible, voluminous asset that then was able to have a process to find a buyer for a very good valuation because of what we had built. The other agencies kind of followed suit, never got to our scale. They started later. They weren't as aggressive out of the gates. They didn't have the backing that we had from Endeavor, where we were really were financing. We were a startup, but we were a startup that was funded by a massive company, by the Endeavor balance sheet. So that gave us an incredible advantage, but we also were just first to do it. So we were way ahead of the competition, and we built it to scale. So by the time the process forced a sale, we had a real asset, right? This wasn't just like a little side hustle of placing a few bets here and there, but not having a real asset behind it. We had a real asset. So nothing changed other than we then had to lead a process, find somebody who would come and buy that 80% in order to comply with the WGA. And we did that successfully, and we brought in a partner, CJ, who stepped into that position. There was never anything that forced us to slow down other than the energy that went to that process, for several months in order to find our new owners.
And you spent 17 years in that world and founded Cat5. How was that idea formed to launch Cat5? And it's a turnkey production and financing company. What does that model look like in practice for filmmakers and financiers?
Oh, there's a few questions in there. I'll answer the first one, which then I think somewhat answers the other ones. At fifth season, which is what Endeavor Content's name changed to after the divestment, at fifth season, made over 40 movies in, I think, 4 years and change, and that included COVID and the strike. So it was an extraordinary volume in that amount of time, but there wasn't, the strategy was volume. The strategy wasn't a certain type of film or a certain market or a certain demographic. It was volume. It worked for purposes of the sale because we built something to scale. As the markets contracted, especially and we built it at a time where the streamers were coming online. They all needed content. They weren't producing content, they were acquiring content. So our strategy was like, let's make a lot of content, let's develop a lot of content, and we'll take advantage of the streamers' need for and hunger and competition for content. That strategy worked while they were all kind of building. When they contracted, because they were now making more of their own content or just generally buying less, that concept of just volume would not make sense. So in launching a new company, with the support of fifth season, I built Cat5 from inside fifth season with dialogue with my partners there and with resources. But I didn't want to do something general again. I didn't want to just do volume again. So basically I went the complete other way and said, let me do something very specific and become focused and an expert in that and build a brand, right? Because it's hard to build a brand if you're doing lots of different things, especially at the consumer level, because those are different consumers. And a consumer, just to use a couple examples of, an example I'd like to use when I was talking about what are we looking for at fifth season. And the answer was kind of everything, because we had a movie called Lost Daughter, Maggie Gyllenhaal directed, that was nominated for several Oscars, out at the same time as Michael Bay's Ambulance, an action movie with Jake Gyllenhaal. Both of those movies, we made them, they were out at the same time. And so the answer to the question was like, we make everything from Lost Daughter to Ambulance, and that covers literally, everything. It's a drama, an action movie, low budget, bigger budget, and so it's kind of everything. So I said, I'm gonna flip that, and I'm only gonna focus on action movies. I'm gonna bet that is the genre that is kind of most dependable, that audiences always like it. You do have to make something that is, if you want it to break out, it's gotta be unique. It's gotta separate from kind of the rest of the pack, but even if it's not unique, there's a hunger for it. It's easily watchable. I found that it was a genre that I watched almost every time I was on a plane. That's what I would want to watch. I'd want to watch an action movie. It was easy to watch. It wasn't divisive. It was rarely polarizing. Either, they were entertainment, right? And you could have different kinds. You could have subgenres. You could have more sophisticated action movies versus less nuanced ones. But they all kind of were mainstream relative to other kinds of movies that might be more execution dependent. So I decided Cat 5 was going to focus on action movies. And now when people ask me what I'm looking for, I say I'm looking for action movies. There's no strict definition of what that means, right? You can kind of know some things are clearly not action movies. Lost Daughter is clearly not an action movie. But there are several movies where you might say, was that really an action movie? Well, I get to decide that. And also, I think, like, if something's plot-driven, propulsive, has some set pieces, somebody might say that's a thriller, not an action. That's okay. I'm getting to the same point. I want to entertain audiences. In A Working Man, it's very clearly an action movie. It has one of the most dependable, biggest action stars in the business. It's very much plot-driven. It's a reteaming with Jason Statham and David Ayer, who did The Beekeeper, which was also an action movie that had great success. So for that to be the movie that I launched my new company with was very exciting, because it also established that an independent action movie could be on the higher end of the budget range. I could say I'm looking for movies that are anywhere from $10 to $75 million. The reality is there could be an action movie that is less than $10 million. It's certainly possible. And there could be an independently financed action movie that's more than $75 million. But it gave a framework to give people a sense of what I'm looking for, that has specificity.
And how did you first got your hands on Working Man? Were you involved from the inception, or it came to you in a later process? How did it become the launch title of Cat 5?
It came to me at the end of 2022. 2023. At that point, it was a package already, but the script was in a very different shape. It seemed to a lot of people in the marketplace that was too expensive, however you determine that. And to a lot of people in Hollywood, not good enough, because the script would eventually become what got made, but was still relatively early in the development process. David Ayer hadn't done his rewrite on it yet. What I like to say is I stayed around the hoop on it, right? I stayed in conversation. I said, I'd like this to make sense. I want to stay excited. Most people wrote it off. So when it came back around a couple months later from one of my partners, and the script was much better, I think the script was, dramatically better, and I could see that the movie was going to be better, and the economics, kind of the financial structure became clear, and that picture looked better. But most people were like, oh, we already saw that. They didn't want to revisit it. They were like, we passed already. It's a very common answer in Hollywood. And I just stayed around it and figured out how to make the deal work, and benefited from other people, missing that it had evolved.
It must be challenging, right? Also, when a movie is rejected and it's a small town in Hollywood and the word of mouth gets around. Did you face any particular challenges because the film was previously?
Oh, I think that's where the best opportunities are. Yeah, I mean, what's the old saying, like, in Hollywood, like, nobody knows anything, right? Like, you think somebody's opinion might be the be-all, end-all, and then somebody else takes that exact same project and turns it into a franchise, right? That happens all the time in Hollywood. I think it's what keeps dreams alive. You have to be able to deal with rejection, and it only takes, one yes to turn, an idea into a movie, whether that yes is from a filmmaker that makes it happen, or an actor makes it happen, or a distributor that buys it, right? And yeah, rejection is part of the game. It's a subjective business.
Totally. And we also heard that Cat 5 is planning to launch into comedy space. Is this true? Which projects are you now working on, and what sort of stories are you planning to champion in this space?
I can neither confirm or deny that rumor. However, I can tell you that out May 9th are really two comedies. Those were movies I made at fifth season. So it was a movie called Friendship, which is a comedy starring Tim Robinson and Paul Rudd. That comes out via A24 on May 9th theatrically. That is a comedy. I mean, I really call it an auteur comedy, but a comedy that I highly recommend seeing with other people in a theater, and kind of it will bring back that feeling of communal laughter. It is played exceptionally well at Toronto and South by Southwest, and I think that's going to reignite excitement in the comedy space. The other one's called Nona's, and that'll be on Netflix May 9th. And that's Vince Vaughn and a huge kind of supporting cast. And that, more like a dramedy, but it has a lot of humor in it. That trailer is out on Netflix. Both trailers are out, but that trailer's out on Netflix. All set at an Italian restaurant in New York. Family friendly, wholesome, inspiring, filled with comedy, but also filled with a lot of emotional moments. Yeah, I think, look, both of those movies I'd already made when I launched Cat 5, and it doesn't change my focus on action films for Cat 5, but certainly the fact that nobody's been making comedies, and that now I'm going to have a comedy that I think is going to, got a really good shot at exciting audiences. Yeah, it makes me think there's more I can be doing in that space.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
This was
Thank
incredible
you.
speaking to you, and it seems like we need to do 3 more episodes with you. So.
I'm down the street. I rode my bike
let's
here.
do it.
And thank you for being so prepared. You summed up my career better than I do.
Honestly, it's like so much to it. I spent a few days reading all about your career, and it's very inspiring too.
Yeah. Well, next time we can talk all about my joint venture with Robert Rodriguez, which is called Brass Knuckle Films.
That'll be the next one. We need to have you both here.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.